Okay, so it's Chris Sync Video 3.
Nick Sync Video 3, Wwise.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, let's start. All right, Nick, so now we've seen the Nuendo session and we've exported some files. You've imported everything into Wwise, so let's have a look at Wwise itself and see how the sausage is made in this stage.
So this is Wwise. This is a basic layout of Wwise. Over here is your Project Explorer, so this is where all of your events or your assets live. Inside this Explorer, we have the audio stuff. This is where you'll actually find, your WAV files are all the way down here. Let me pull. There we go. So that's like one of the WAV files that's imported, right? Mm-hmm. The game engine triggers things using events. And so just having that in here does nothing. And so these are just the audio you've actually imported. To get the game to trigger them, we need to use events. Typically what I do is I will right click, new event, and you have all these options.
Okay.
As far as I know, the game engine doesn't care what event it is, and it's just a matter of how it's named, and that keeps it clear for the designer, me, inside of Wwise to know what is what. The cool thing about events is we can have this entire structure down here do something with one event. So one play ambient zone artifact world event stops the other ambiences and then plays the new ambience. Mm-hmm. We could build a whole list of logic here that this one event will trigger. We can delay things over here using these, these different properties of whatever event we're trying to trigger. Mm-hmm. It's pretty powerful. So like as the designer, I can tell Duncan over at Hopu just to be like, hey, fire this event. And that's all he has to hook up, just one thing. Using Unreal or Unity, they would have to do everything individually and do all that logic on their own with code. Mm-hmm. But as a designer, I can set that up and I can set it up the way I want it to behave within reason. There are some things we just can't do that we need code support for. But if I can trigger one thing and have it do what I need, we're going to do that. And that saves the back and forth between me and their team, because even though I'm implementing audio into Wwise, I'm not integrating those hooks into Unity. Right. That's their team, and we have a whole spreadsheet that lays out the understanding of what my event is doing. Mm-hmm. And where I need it hooked on their side. And because if I have less hooks for them, it makes things easier and simpler. So that's how we've set up stuff for us. Simply because we are not an integrated audio team. We are on, a couple months right before a content release. We're working, but other than that, we're not integrated in the whole project the entire time.
Right.
So we don't have like a ton of code support to help us out making all these different hooks. We're trying to keep it simple and move quickly. Soundbanks are the very important thing that the game engine needs. What Wwise does is it's like a black box. Wwise does all this logic and this stuff inside of it and only sends out certain connections and inputs and outputs to the game engine. But most of it just stays inside of Wwise. Mm-hmm. The game engine, the developers don't need to know what's happening in Wwise. It's just not a big problem. It just works. But the one thing that the game engine does need are called Soundbanks. And what these do is you can use different conversion settings to take your audio, your high quality, full frequency audio, waves, for our example, we use waves, and converts it into a more game friendly format. I think we use Ogg Vorbis for this one. Mm-hmm. So it's compressed. And that saves on disk space when we're delivering a game to the end user. Right. We don't want to have gigabytes and gigabytes just of raw wave files.
Indeed.
So what we do is they package them into Soundbanks. You can set your settings on how you want it to compress, right? And the game loads these Soundbanks. The cool thing about Soundbanks is we don't have to have every sound in the game loaded at once. We can load them as we need them, unload them. So we're saving on memory usage while we're doing gameplay as well. It's still a system that's in progress and we're still tweaking it and making it work better.
Yeah.
But hopefully that creates optimizations for end users and, lesser.
Was about to say, just like everything else, we optimize as we go, depending on, how much sound we've added or anything else, that needs to save up resources for the game.
The one exception to Soundbanks is streaming assets do not get packaged into a Soundbank itself. The information for it is inside of a Soundbank, but it's still pointing to another file that it uses, and we use this for music.
Okay.
Music files are typically the largest files in an audio project, just because they're long.
Yeah, because they're long.
Stereo files, they can be 2-3 minutes long. I wish I could see really quickly how long the longest audio sound effect event is, but I bet you it's no longer than like 20 seconds, if that.
Yeah. I think I sent you a 14-minute track or something for the game.
Yeah, we could have that in there.
Okay. But some of them went a little bit overboard, I guess. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's all good. It's good music.
Yeah. Okay.
So those are just set to streaming, and we don't need to dive into that. But it's basically another file that the game is just reading on the fly,
right?
Almost like it was a CD player, and you were, the laser is like reading off the disc as it plays. That's pretty much what this is doing. So it uses a little more processing power to like get that information, but it doesn't load the whole file into a memory.
Right.
Therefore, saving, it's a yin and a yang.
Yeah.
And it's perfect for music stuff. I wouldn't want to do that for shorter sound events, just because that CPU and that disc reading is really bad when you're, firing those small bullets that we just had from the minigun guy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, we don't want to stream those. Here's a list of like some of the soundbanks we have. There's a lot of them.
Indeed.
There probably should be more.
What are we looking at now? What is this structure? Is it is it the entire game? Is it one character? Is it one environment? What is...
This view right now is whatever you want it to be.
Okay.
This is looking at the entire project. We're not looking at... It's not like Unity where you can load up smaller assets.
Okay.
We're looking at the entire project at all times. The way that Wwise compartmentalizes things is with work units. They're shown by this little icon here with a little green. That's because I have Perforce. This is all synced to a Perforce depot. And so when my team is working in here, I will know if they're working in a certain work unit.
Okay.
And it'll check that out. So I don't overwrite their work. So we can still all work in this project, which is really cool for multi-person audio teams.
Right.
We can still work in it. We just have to work in our little compartmentalized area, which is work units. And you'll see these guys, these newer characters are built out into work units, but some of the original ones just weren't because we didn't build that structure yet.
Right.
So yeah, we're looking at the whole project. On this side with the audio events, this is where I spend most of my time as a designer. This is how I get sounds to behave how I want. Let's just check, Engineer has some cool stuff. So these are all the Engineer audio events.
Okay.
They're named. Naming convention is just my own. It's how I keep things clear.
As long as everybody knows what we're talking about, that's fine.
Yeah, as long as I know and the programmers who have to hook up the event that this is associated with know. So under this is what we call an actor mixer. It's just like a little submix for everything underneath it.
Okay.
And so with that, I have like these parameters here that I could set. So I use these actor mixers as almost like little submix buses. If for whatever reason my exports on all the engineer stuff that I had from my Nuendo session were way louder or way quieter than maybe the Commando, I can very easily grab just this actor mixer and do the quick volume adjustment that I need to make, instead of having to like go into each individual one or maybe doing like a multi-edit or what have you. It's just how I structure it because it's very DAW focused. This is like very
yeah, as we said in the
familiar.
on the first part of the talk, it makes sense for an audio person. It's something that we understand. Okay.
Yep. And the music section actually is even more DAW familiar, and you'll really recognize that stuff, especially with stems. So yeah, the engineer stuff, he lives under here. We have another actor mixer, just kind of another sub mix for like his Seeker missile events that were done after all of this stuff. That was like the abilities 2.0 or something. So down here with all the audio stuff underneath my actor mixer, we have all these different containers. And the ones I've chosen for most of these are random. You can see a list of them up here at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I chose random, and what that does is by default, it'll just choose whichever asset is underneath it, inside of it, inside that container at random when that event is called.
Nice.
So down here in the event viewer, I can also just see, based on my current selection, which is just the M1 Explode, what events is it used in?
Mm-hmm.
You can see it's used in 2. It's used in Clayboss M1 as well. Sometimes we reuse assets, and that's part of the game. It'll have another layer on there, I'm sure, but so by default, it'll randomly choose one of these as I play it. Like, here's what the sound sounds like. I'm just doing spacebar, by the way. Simple little explosion sound, right? But as you heard, it's choosing a different one each time.
Exactly.
In the random container, there are some other options, and you'll see that I use those a lot for ambiances and any type of looping. I use that. If you don't want to hear the same one of the assets as much as the others, you can change their weight, and it'll choose one over the other a little more, so it's not a completely equal random.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a random container still, but I have it set up here in the general settings of this container. I have it set to a continuous play mode. So I only hit spacebar once, I only play this event once, and it'll continually play based on these other things I have set down here. This is the way I build a lot of the loops in the game. I'm not actually making a seamless looping audio event.
Okay.
What I'm doing is I have these 5 samples here. Each one looks like about a second, maybe more. A little more than a second, but you see there's like a fade on it. It's not a perfectly synced loop. And what I do, and you can see like these are kind of what they all look like anyway. And what I do is back in the random container that these are all in, set the loop infinite, so I just want it to go forever. Transition type, either crossfade amp or crossfade power, and then set a time for that. And what that's going to do is it's going to play one of these samples, and then, what is that, 3.375 whatever seconds before the end, it's going to start playing the next one and fade that in. And so there's going to be a nice crossfade between all these 5 samples. And it's going to randomly pull from that pool of 5 to play the next one.
Okay.
I can also avoid repeating the last whatever played. I have 1, so it's not going to play the same sample twice in a row.
Okay.
I could set that to 2 or 3. And what this is going to do is while this event is played, which, as you can see down here with my events, it's part of the shift start event, the shift end event, and the stop ng shift loop event, which this is the shift loop. So basically what I'm doing here is when you hit shift with the engineer, it plays a sound. It also starts this loop. And when you end the shift, if you hold up on shift, I believe you have to hold it down to use the shift, the sprint. It'll play another sound, but also stop the event.
Right.
And I have this stop event here as a failsafe for any other edge case they need to explicitly call that, tell the game to stop this loop if you never hit shift end or something happens. So that's there as more of a failsafe. But looking into this event, the play ng shift start, you'll see I'm doing 2 things inside this one event. Playing the start sound and then starting the loop.
Right.
So with that one event, I'm achieving 2 things. So if I hit play, you'll hear it.
Great.
And I stopped it. Which shift, now I'm thinking of it, I think it's the shield. I don't think it's not the sprint.
I'm sure people.
Yeah, the sprint's down here.
Leave a comment
they're
below.
Gonna correct us. Yep, they're gonna correct us. It's the big shield, the big engineer shield.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I set up a lot of loops. That's the cool thing about Wwise, is it lets you stitch these little segments of sound together to make a loop, and that loop will never sound the same, because it's choosing out of those 5 random ones.
It's actually
That's how I do it.
quite fascinating capability. Would have a lot of application even in music, like aleatoric music, or you wanna make something that is kind of being tweaked real time or whatever. Right? So it's a really cool thing. Yeah. Of course, obviously saves a ton of time and resources, because if you really wanted to set, I mean, you could never set up something that is static and be truly random. But if you want to fake randomness with like baked sounds, then it would be so much space and
yeah. So for this little loop, for example, I would have to build it the length that shield would live. Like that loop would have, or I just build the sound that long, and then we're at how many seconds of an audio file instead of these 5, like second and a half maybe.
Right.
Events. This is another thing with just like game audio design in general is I'm trying to leave enough space in my designs and the way I've exported and implemented sounds that there is room for iteration and room for change. Because if I built that sound when the shield goes down, the shield's up, and then it's down, all as one sound effect, that's timing locked. I don't have any wiggle room on, okay, they changed, you know what, that was OP, so we're gonna make the shield only last 1 second now.
Right.
And then I gotta go back in and design.
Yeah.
The way I built this system, we have a start, a loop, and a stop. Doesn't matter how long that sound is, it can go on forever. It could be as short as we want it.
Nice.
So we have that flexibility, which is really important when you're working on a game that has a chance to evolve and change.
We update all the time, yeah. It would be a nightmare to go through so many sounds and adjust to whatever new conditions. Yeah. That's great.
So it might be a little more work while you're like designing the sound and breaking it out for your export, but you save so much time later on if there are iterations. So this is like my trick in Wwise. This is how I build loops using small segments. But let's run real quick down through what the rest of these containers are, because that was a random container. Switch container uses what Wwise calls a switch. That is a parameter that the game sends back to Wwise and tells it to change. These are super useful for footsteps is the biggest example. I have one event for footsteps, but I have a switch that changes what I'm hearing based on that. Let's dive into footsteps just to show that. So a footstep right here, step material.
Oh, okay.
Player footstep is the main one. Some of the newer ones have special events for them. But under this switch has different materials. Because I just want this one event, play player footstep, to work for most of our heroes, our survivors.
Right.
And that makes it easy for hookup on Hopu's side, right? They just have to set this one event up, and they just have to set some logic to make these switches for whenever the player walks over a certain material.
Right. So the game tells you where you are, and Wwise just does the rest, essentially.
Yep. The game says, all right, I'm over dirt now. We're going to change the switch, which you can see the switch here is using just material. And I can use this switch for many things. This isn't just like a one-time global thing. It can be per game object. So each character has their own iteration of this. So they can move on different surfaces and hear their own sounds. Same with enemies. We could use it for anything. If we had a huge body fall and it needed to be specific to a sound, we could use it on that. It doesn't have to be just for the footsteps. So here's where I set more of my switches for the switch container, what switch it's using, the default switch. Yeah, over here is where you set up kind of the matrix on what I'm choosing. So underneath the switch container, I have all these other random containers. We just went over random containers. And using this over here will show every switch that's in here, in this group. And you can see this is how it would look before you assign it. Okay. And so now I would go in and I would drag, from here over, and I'd say, all right, dirt, great, metal, yada, yada, yada. And I'd fill that out. And then it just switches. It just works. If the game code is set up to send me this information, you play step material and it just works. We're here in dirt now because we're on default, but if I go down here into my transport control, I can actually drive some switches and RTPCs, which we can talk about in a minute, and states. But because of what I have highlighted here, it's only using this switch container. or this switch group, that's the only option I have, right? Which makes sense. It's not clogging this.
Yeah.
Because I have something else selected. So now I can switch, all right, metal. Still just playing the same event up here. So that's how switches work.
Nice. This kind of makes a lot of sense, but it's also kind of very, I mean, it's fascinating that we can actually do all that stuff. You know, it makes a lot of sense that, okay, we need that, but it's actually kind of crazy that we can just do it.
Yeah, I want the game engine to do as much work as possible for me. I don't want to have to hand author specific things, specific events. I'm working on a game right now where they use the sequencer in Unreal, and they don't have a footstep system set up for tied to animations. So every footstep in the sequencer is hand authored to match when the footstep lands. And it's a pain. I want the game engine to do that for me. I want those footstep triggers, the sound triggers, to be like on the animation, for example.
Right.
Just the way they have their game set up, we can't work that way. So I want the game engine to do as much information or much work for me as possible, and I'm sure Hopu does as well. So they set this up. They just have to tag those materials that you walk on as certain, a certain class.
Yeah.
And it's done. The artist will tag it as a class, and wherever they put that in the level builder in the world, it just will work. So that's step containers. We can go into the ambience now because I think there's blend containers in that. So we just kind of find it. It's under environment, ambience. Go with Sky Meadow. Sounds good. That's a new level.
Right.
So we got a couple blend containers here. Sky Meadow itself has 2 zones in it. No spoilers, but there is a hidden lab.
I'm sure it was discovered 5 minutes after the update.
Right.
Yeah.
But we'll dig into the sky zone here. So a blend container, the way I'm using this blend container is it's simply one container that plays all of these loops simultaneously. It just triggers them all at once. I could build this another way if I wanted, but blend containers also can do interesting things if you have your blend tracks set up here. I'm not using it in this respect, and this is probably not optimal, but this is just a quick way that I set things up. And blend tracks can use different RTPCs, the parameter controls that are more granular than switches. A switch is like, it's this, or it's this, or it's this. RTPCs are more like float values that we can modify in game, and we can make nice sweeping curves and do different things, a lot of different things with those parameters from the game. One of them being the music feeling like it's underwater when you're outside of the teleporter event.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is kind of more akin to a linear automation that we would have in a DAW.
In a DAW.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Except the game engine is driving that automation, so it can fluctuate as needed.
Right. It's not a written out automation, but it's a real time automation based on stuff going on in the game. Yeah. Just think there's a robot in the game engine that is there with a bunch of knobs and sliders, and he's like adjusting things. So switches you can think of as a more game object, more granular, smaller things. But there's another game sync in Wwise called states, and states are more of a global thing. You can't change them individually per game object per player. It's like this state is changed, and therefore it affects everything hooked up to that state. And so we use that to drive music. And I'm going to switch to my music view here, which is, I believe, F10. Yes. So my music editor. So Wwise has like all of these like different views. So each view can be like moved around. We can add them. Yeah.
So if we have a mixing desk,
kind of a modular environment. Yeah.
Very modular. So we can drag and drop and customize our interface exactly how we want. So we could throw like the mixing desk like here or something.
Right. Nice.
But they do come with some default layouts up in here, which give you a bunch. So this is the interactive music one. Without this, I wouldn't be able to see like all this music stuff down here. So down here at the bottom of our audio project explorer is interactive music, and underneath this is everything for music in the game.
Oh, nice.
Right? So you can see this is how many tracks we've thrown into the game. These are some older ones up here that have been unchecked so they don't get packaged and rendered and we don't use them. But basically what happens is music is simply... Hold on. So I just changed my view again. There we go. So music right here is how we drive it. We basically fire one play music event at the start of the game and never again. We drive it all with states.
Okay.
And this is a couple reasons why. It's the main one being we want tempo and timing synced music if we need it to occur as we transition from one piece to the next. Because if we stopped and then started, we might lose that tempo if we had one, and the transition if we had one. So we start the music at the beginning. If we don't want to hear any music, we have states that will get us that. But also in here we have, the pause all events. When you pause the game, it pauses the music. Unpause all the same, unpause music, different things. But basically this play music is what we want, what we care about. So that plays at the very start of the game. Once we play it, we're using states. And the states are here. So you can have a huge state logic if you wanted. If you had multiple states you needed to make a choice, you could have them here and then you would choose your path. Let me actually just add a couple. Just to kind of show you what you can do. Nice. So you can have all of this stuff. So if we want to all right, when you're in a boss fight and the enemy type is set to elite and maybe it's a ghost, we're going to add that path. And so only when this condition is met will you go to play this object.
Right.
We don't have that complex a logic in this game, but you can do that, which is really cool. There's a similar system for their dialogue trees in Wise. We don't have any dialogue in this game, so I don't have anything to show with that. But it's a similar logic thing with that, based on the states you set up and switches you set up. So just like the switches, the game will tell what state we're in to make these choices in the game.
Essentially, I'm assuming it will tell you you're in the menu, you're in the logbook, you're in a particular level. And do you know how boss fights are triggered? Is it is it a level dependent or is it boss dependent? I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not sure how they're doing it because they can do in their logic some random choices, I believe, based on what states they want to choose. But we can see here if we collapse all these children. So these are our choices under the main music system. So we basically have this cascading switches or cascading states. And you have to be in one state in order to access what's underneath it, and so on. So under the main music system, we have these 4 objects. We also have a none, so that would be when we go to no music if we want it. But we have a boss fight one, and so that'll choose the boss song choice, which is here. Gameplay, which is most of the time you're spent there. Secret level, which is right there. And main menu, which is the music menu switch. So we have to, if we were in this menu switch, we also have to make another state group choice to hear anything. Unlike the secret level, which is just a music playlist container, that'll play that immediately because it has no other choices. That's the music system state group made that choice. And this logic can be confusing to talk about, but if we had some way to diagram this out, it would all make sense. It'd be like some big tree, and you can only make certain choices if you go down one of the tree paths. So music system will choose gameplay song choice, for example. In gameplay song choice, we have a gameplay song choice state group, and in that we have a bunch of different songs. I have no way, at least that I know of, in Wise to randomly choose one of these, because these have to be set by the game. So the game code is setting which gameplay song choice we're going. Whether or not they decide on some randomization to make that choice in the game code, that's on them. So some levels you'll hear different music, and some you won't, and that's all based on their choices in the engine. But under that, we have the same structure down here with all these paths, and the associated songs that they play, and it goes to the music playlist container. Do you have a particular song you like, Chris?
You can
Like,
play
they're not
14, I think. Can you find it?
14's right here. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It is a Sky Meadows, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool. So what I do when Chris sends me these tracks, he's sending me this WAV file, which is found down here. And now we can see some waveforms.
Right. Which is just a stereo bounce of the entire thing. And, well, we'll talk about the other layer.
Yeah, it's just a stereo bounce. But I drag these music segments into a... they go into a playlist container here, and this is how I set how I want it to behave. We had some before we did like a full song, like 2 mix, which is what you're seeing there, we had a much more involved interactive music system,
complicated
which
system,
introduced a lot of bugs. There's a lot of complications.
Yeah.
So we just decided to scrap that and go back to kind of what Risk of Rain 1 did.
Yeah, we tried to essentially kind of have the music follow the intensity, but in the end,
it was hard.
It didn't make too much sense also because I think it also has to do a lot with the way the music is structured. It has this kind of linearity, this arc, which if you were stuck in a loop and didn't go to the next bit of the music, it just didn't make any sense musically. So we decided that I think we tried a couple of iterations of that, and it was just like either too complex to set up, and then eventually just didn't pay off. So we decided, okay, full mix from top to bottom, play, start again, and it's interesting because a lot of times I get feedback from the players that say how well the music syncs up, which obviously it doesn't, it just plays back. But I think because the music has a particular logic in its, how it plays out and how it evolves, I think players kind of sync up to that in their own, they groove to it essentially. It just works so much better than from a few couple of months in the beginning that it wasn't like that and was kind of messy.
Yeah, it was tough. We built, you can kind of see a little bit here of some of the old songs that we had, and it used another switch, or another state group here, based on, we had these intensity levels.
Right.
And based on that, we would have, in our playlist container would be a little different. Yeah, here we go, here's one. It would play an intro section, and then it would play the main section. And that's how we kind of had it set up. But the game just wasn't, the game wasn't final enough yet, and we didn't have a good understanding of how we would change these intensities.
Exactly.
From a game code perspective,
because
they would have to make that decision.
Yeah, and it's also the game loop is a bit different from, let's say, I don't know, Doom, for example, that you will go into the level and then you will activate the thing and start the fight. It might have strong loop, stronger loop, and super strong loop, and choose from those, and then once you kill the last enemy, it will go into the breakdown and kind of be quiet, so you know that now I'm done. But Risk of Rain is just not like that. You're dumped into the level and just starts, and things start happening. And
and it was very hard to quantify what is intense mean, because as the game goes, it's all intense, which maybe that makes sense. But we do have, once the boss fight starts, the music does transition. I'm sure players have noticed that. And so once I get a track in, it usually comes in 2 stems, like you can see here, especially for the gameplay songs, the songs that are in the level.
For the level, for the pre-teleporter.
And so what this stem down here is the teleporter stem, the beacon stem.
The beacon, which is what we call it, of course. It's not,
the bacon stem. But because this is not a 3D object, this is music, we still want this beacon to inform the player of where the teleporter could be.
We should say, because we say the beacon, but what this means is that this is kind of a musical layer that emits from the teleporter, essentially, to guide players towards it. There's a lot of visual feedback about it in the level, but we also added a subtle thing.
It's very subtle.
Yeah.
Let's see if we'll play it, if we can hear it. So this is what that beacon track sounds like. And it just kind of goes like that, more or less, for this piece.
Right.
It's a little different for each piece of music. So it fits with that.
It also,
song.
it follows the harmony of the music. Yeah. So that's why they're also equal length. So that's.
So it's basically a stem for this piece of music, but it's not actually placed on the teleporter, so it has no 3D spatialization. This is still a music track. It's still 2D. But in order to communicate how can it drive you to the teleporter, we're using what's called RTPCs, real-time parameter controls. And we have a couple parameter controls here. We have teleporter direction and teleporter proximity. So proximity would be how far away I actually am from it. Doesn't matter the direction. And the direction is, what direction is it in from the player's point of view? And I believe 0 degrees is the player's point of view, and 180 would be behind, 270 is to the left, that sort of thing. Goes like clockwise. But using these parameter controls, we're able to pan front to back and around us. Front to back is not usually important for most players who are playing on stereo, might be playing on headphones. But for anyone that's playing on a surround sound setup, that's important. We also have a low pass filter applied, which I do this throughout the game. Anything that is 3D and behind the player is filtered out a little bit.
So it's
very slightly. So your focus is more pointed ahead of you. Where it should be. But I still want to inform you that something's behind, but I don't want it to sound like it's in front of you. So you can kind of place it a little better. This also happens with things vertically to the player, so that we can kind of place things, all right, it's behind me and above, rather than maybe just behind me. It's like psychoacoustic little tricks that help with that. But we're doing that with the music here as well. So when it gets behind you, which is about 180 degrees, it filters the low end, or low passes, sorry. And the proximity, as you see, like as we're at 0, as we're right next to it, it's at 0 volume, but as you're further away, 10,000 game units, I believe. 10,000 game units.
Nice.
It goes down to like nothing. And so we can also look at all of these together and see how they're interacting. It's kind of a weird view. They're not, obviously we don't have any sort of scale now because they're all on different scales. But the panning left to right, it starts out at no panning, and then it pans up, and then goes back to the left, and so that's how we're moving the teleporter around. And let's see actually if we can get this going in real time here. We might be able to audition this. Looking at these, teleporter proximity. Let's bring that all the way up so it's loud. And where's my direction? Here we go. Let's see if this works. There's our layer. Let's change the direction. This should be going to the right. Ooh. Now behind you.
Yeah, we can hear the filtering out of the frequencies. Yeah, nice.
And to your left, and then back ahead.
Great. So we're kind of faking it, instead of...
We're faking,
as you said, we're not placing it in an object, but because of how music works in general, in Wise, but we're still pretty good at, locating it within the game's world.
And maybe that's been helpful to people or not, I don't know. It's kind of hard to hear because it is part of the music, so if you have music going, it's pumping, it's
we didn't
subtle.
want it to be too disturbing because we want, musically we prioritize the song, but it's just a little thing,
Yeah, it's a little taste, little texture.
Yeah.
So that brings us to like how we interactively mix this thing, because music is such an important part of this game, and it's so pumping and pounding. How do we communicate what is happening on screen and makes it keep the clarity that the player needs in order to perform as well as they can, to know what's going on and get that audio feedback from the game? And the way we do that, we have a couple different systems working in tandem. But if we go to the top of this mixer over here, we'll put those down. This is our busing structure.
Right.
And so everything down here is assigned a bus that it goes to. Depending on what level it's on, it'll decide. And so up here in this bus, we have what's called an HDR bus. And HDR is the system we're using for most of this. It's, I believe, called high dynamic range. It's a Wwise system. It's an interactive mixing thing. But everything underneath here that is chosen will get processed by this HDR system. Now you notice the music is not part of that. The music, it lives outside this HDR bus, and I'll go into the HDR bus in a second and how that system works at a high level. But the music lives outside of that, so it's not actually being affected by that. We don't have it part of that system. It has to use a different system, and we're using a more traditional way of ducking music when other things are playing. And the way we're doing that is from the sound effects bus, which is the higher level of the HDR. We have a meter effect. They call them effects. That meter effect, which you can't see, is basically it's using Wwise to develop to send to Wwise a real-time parameter control. And so we're looking at the volume level of the sound effects bus output and assigning a numerical value that then Wwise can use somewhere else.
Right.
Most game engines can't do this. They can't analyze the audio level for RMS or peaks or anything like that and can't assign a numerical value. That's just something audio software does. So we're able to assign it. It's going to the meter SFX real-time parameter control with a minimum value of -96, which this is a dB translation. So -96 would be inaudible, and 0 would be at 0 dB. But we're taking that parameter that we just output using that meter plugin, and it goes here. And what this does is this, if you're playing the game and you're watching, because the cool thing about Wwise too is if I'm playing the game right now, I can plug in and get some real-time feedback in Wwise of what's happening.
Okay.
That's how I mix and I troubleshoot most of the game. So once they have things hooked up, fire up the game, fire up Wwise, connect them, and I get so much data output. And it helps solve a lot of bugs, solve a lot of issues.
That's pretty
just
great,
see what's
actually.
going on. Yeah, it's really handy. But if you have that up and you're playing, you'll see this meter here, this level, which this is signifying where we are on that parameter, like what value we have. You'll see that thing just like going like crazy like this. And that's by design, because up here at the max level of 0, we're only ducking the music 3 dB.
Okay.
Which doesn't sound like much, but it's enough, and especially if it's moving super fast. When we move it super fast, that means there's something playing in the background. If we isolated the music and still had that ducking going, we'd hear it. Yeah. Right? We'd hear that it'd be very subtle pumping. It wouldn't be like, you wouldn't have like tails. It's not like a nice techno track. The release wouldn't take so long. But it just gives enough room for that sound effect to kind of punch through, and then the music comes back. And it's happened so fast that the player doesn't perceive it as
really
ducking the music.
Yeah.
It just feels like, oh, okay, that sound, I heard that sound effect, great, and the music's like still going.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing with that. As you can see on this bus, this is how you control in your options menu your music value. This is that slider in the settings menu.
Right.
For the music volume. So that's how we do the music ducking.
Actually, interestingly enough, because the music for the game is so dense, I actually use a pretty similar system to prioritize. So I'm setting up various compressors on my buses or particular tracks that are just listening to other stuff. So when my solo kicks in, it might duck a little bit of the pads or put them to the side or something, and it's kind of just making a little bit of space. Or the kick drum will push away the pads and stuff like that. So it kind of makes a lot of sense what you said. It's fast enough that you don't really notice it sometimes, or it's just there's also a lot of masking going on. When you add a new loud sound, it will cover a lot of the existing frequencies and you don't really miss them. So yeah.
And so what just for the audience, if they might know this term, if they're audio people or interested in it, sidechain. We basically in Wwise just built a sidechain compressor.
Exactly.
And we don't have as much control over a lot of the things, the ratios and things like that you might in a standard compressor. But that's what you're doing in your music to get things to cut through. You're sidechaining, and that's what we built here essentially, using their effects. Yeah, so that's how the music is kind of reined in and controlled if it's the highest volume. Now, I will say I think someone asked a question about like how do we battle between music and sound effects and what's important. I mean, I'm an audio guy, I'm a sound designer. When we first mixed this game, I got feedback from the guys at Hopu that were like, we need more music. We need the music to be higher. And I was like, okay, we can do that. And we just had to adjust this, so we made sure that the important things could cut through that. Right. But they were very much like music, because Risk of Rain 1 was music. Yeah. There are sound effects, obviously, but it was more sparse sound design. Like
yes, true.
It's a very, very stylized, very different game than what Risk of Rain 2 is, where we're not enveloped in a 3D world. We're looking at a 2D plane in Risk of Rain 1, and it could be very, very far away from you if you zoom all the way out. Yeah. But it was a very different approach as far as like sound design goes in music, and music just covered up so much stuff. Like because it was such a sparse sound design in that first game. Yeah. You had like some, little death sounds, little shot sounds, like what have you, but for the most part, it's pretty empty, and so music helps to fill the space and fill the environment. Yeah. Yeah, you were gonna say.
I think we didn't even have ambient sounds at all. We didn't have like.
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. And just for everyone to know, I didn't work on Risk of Rain 1, so I don't know what happened.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Duncan did all the sounds himself. I didn't do it.
Cool.
So
nice.
He did it all himself. I mean, he did a good job.
Did a good job. That's the music stuff. That's how that's managed. Now, all the sound effects work with this HDR system on their own. So HDR is really cool. So I just have to enable it here on this mix bus, and it'll do its thing. There's more stuff to do. It's like setting it up and getting it working, of course, yeah. Right? But you can see the ratios are like 100. So once you enable the HDR on this bus, everything that passes through this bus, which is all of these sub-buses, is now part of it. It's part of the HDR system. And what that does is we'll look at one of the bosses down here. Let's look at the Robo Ball, as we called it. I can't remember what it ended up being. But what that does is that changes your fader here, which you would normally assume to be just volume, either attenuating, lowering the volume of this object, or raising it. No longer does that. It sets the like voice importance or something. I don't know the term for it, but basically this is how I'm setting my priorities up in the HDR hierarchy. Right now, like you can see, this actor mixer is set at 0, so there's no influence. As we go down, this is the Roboball Mini, so he doesn't have anything. But now you can see we have some increases, which you would rarely ever see in an audio work. You rarely ever boost stuff. You always try and attenuate because you're running into distortion problems.
Right.
But now, because this is the voice volume stuff, what this will do is this is set to 4. So if this sound plays, anything else that is playing that isn't 4 or isn't deemed important based on other factors will reduce the volume of everything else by about 4.
Okay.
So if I set it to 9, it will reduce everything by 9. So as you go up in importance, and I believe some of these are very important. Let's see, there might be something. Yeah, here we go. Gravity bump charge. So this is that huge event that he does where this thing on the ground starts charging up, and then the huge explosion that does a ton of damage to you. So that has importance 7, which is pretty high in the system. And like the fader maxes out at 12 for like dragging, but I could just put in whatever value I wanted. It would adjust if I type it in. So you have that freedom, even though it doesn't graphically tell you what you can do.
Right.
Yeah, so that's basically the higher level thing of what's happening is these certain sounds will duck other ones in real time based on what else is happening, how close you are to certain things. and all that. That's the basic. There's a lot more that goes into it to getting it to work properly, but that's how it chooses what is important and what to do when that thing plays over other things.
Nice.
If you do need to adjust your volume, say your bounced out's too low and you're like, ah, crap, I need this to be a little louder, under the conversion tab now, there's makeup gain.
Okay.
And so that's where you could boost or lower depending on what you need. This event is super loud. I needed it louder. It goes up to 10. You also need to have loudness normalization enabled. And if we dive down into that sound itself, finding the asset and opening this up, this waveform viewer, you see this little purple line?
Mm-hmm.
This is the HDR envelope.
Okay.
And so what this does is this analyzed the sound and found like where these peaks are and what basically how it's going to drive the ducking when this sound plays. So it's not just like this sound plays and it ducks everything while it's playing, because what could happen then is that if this sound file for whatever reason had a long tail and was like really getting quiet as the file is going, you wouldn't
need to be pushing other stuff for that moment.
So this is a little more. It's like a very intelligent sidechain compressor and sidechain ducker. We might have some better waveforms here, because you can see like these ones that are just the shot, which actually has reverb enabled. Cool. Is not going to do anything from the very first tenth of a second of this sound,
right?
Whatever. And at the end, it's not going to do much either. It's only during this meet that it's engaging the HDR.
So this is generated automatically from Wwise.
Yes. Right. Yep. This is generated when you selected the envelopes. But this is where you need to be the envelope tracking. Mm-hmm. So enable envelope for everything underneath here. Cool thing is if this for whatever reason wasn't right, this envelope that it drew, or you need to do some cool stuff with it, you can completely modify this per sound.
Wow.
So if I found like, oh, this sound here is not actually cutting through enough, so I'm gonna really raise it, and now that is gonna
push everything
cut
back
right through.
That's great.
That's the basic high level stuff. It's really cool with all these curves, how it works. And if we actually had the game plugged in and I had my profiler up, we could see like it would draw all of these envelopes when a sound plays, and you could see how it is like pushing things down and adjusting things. But that's super high level stuff. That's how it's like dynamically mixing individual assets in game.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So once we're all set up, everything's ready to go. I've made all my tweaks. I got all my containers set. My events are all set up. And I'm ready to like deliver this to the project to get into the game. I have to generate my Soundbanks, and that's a layout Soundbank. You can see all the Soundbanks here. They're all checked. You can see all of our platforms. You can see what languages, if we had languages, and then we would just generate. And this would generate these Soundbanks to a specific file or a specific folder that then they would import into the game. The game integration of Wwise would choose these Soundbanks and have all the information they need to do everything. It has all of those real-time parameter controls in it. It has every event is in it. All of the actual audio media files are in it that it needs. All the streaming music is in it. It's basically just a little package of audio data that the game needs in order to run. The interesting thing is while we're developing is, we're playing on a special branch on Steam to to test our game, to test our work. What I can do is, if I'm plugged in, I can make changes in Wwise and hear it in real time in the game, which is cool. But a safer way to do it too, to double check everything, is after I'm done all those changes, I'll generate those sound banks. I can actually just find the folder in where the game is, copy those sound banks over, it updates everything. So now I have brand new updated audio in the game without having to have them completely rebuild a new build of the game. Right. I don't need to wait for them to do that. And so that saves a lot of time when we're iterating and we're making tweaks and fixes, and also makes it easier for them, so they're not always having to push builds just for us.
Yeah, just for a new update, on sound.
The only thing is we would need, if we need code changes or code hooks, obviously those would have to be a new build.
Right.
But if it's any sort of stuff we do inside of Wwise, those Soundbanks will just update and should work if things were working, were hooked up before.
Yeah.
So that's the basic pipeline. I mean, we use Git for source control.
Yeah.
For better or worse. I hate Git personally, but that's just because I work with binary files all the time.
I have no opinion on it.
Yeah. It's just kind of a pain. It's great for coding. It's great for text files and anything you can merge. But if we had more than one person working on this project, if it's more than just me, Git would be a real headache. We'd be overwriting work all the time. Luckily, we're not because it's just me. But that's just one of the headaches with Git.
Yeah. Well, can't have it all.
But yeah, then I just push them updates with the project. They have access to the entire project as well. It's not just the Soundbanks. So Hopu has that, and they integrate it and do their work, and we just continue that feedback loop of putting things in game, me testing them out, trying them out. If they have any iteration feedback, we just keep doing that until we're satisfied or we run out of time.
Exactly. That's a good parameter there. Yeah, I think I've sent you plenty of music, like in the last few minutes that I had available to, for us to drop it in for like quality control and Steam and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's game development,
Yeah.
Cool.
That's true. All right, that's great. I mean, we had a lot of info dumped into people. They can always ask us stuff in the comments if they want something. And speaking of that, can you tell us a little bit if they want to ask you something or find you or hire you for a project? Where can people find you?
Sure. My company is called SkewSound, SKEU Sound. So you can just find us SkewSound.com, at SkewSound, on all the social media stuff. Myself, I go by Kallman Sound, which is my last name. You'll probably link that somewhere in this below in the comments,
Indeed.
I'm sure, or description.
In the description that no one will ever read because this is YouTube.
That no one will ever read, yeah. So that's where you can find us. If you'd have any more questions, I'm happy to answer stuff. I am terrible at social media. Chris is like a master and has these crazy followings. So I apologize if someone reaches out and we haven't, I don't respond or we don't respond. But yeah, that's where you can ask me anything. So
awesome. And well, you mentioned a couple of projects, not by name, but you mentioned that you're doing other stuff. So you're kind of not just working on Risk of Rain right now. And if I understand correctly, you guys, SkewSound as a collective, as a company, you also do music for projects, right? You have people that,
Yeah. So our company's structured. We have 4 people on full time right now. 2 of us are like me, sound design and technical sound design, which is what we actually refer to, like working in Wwise is
right.
Technical sound design. So 2 of us do that, and then 2 are more primarily composers. But we all dabble in all aspects of sound.
Right.
Except for me, I don't do any music. So.
But I do see a guitar on the background hanging in the wall.
Yeah, I play guitar. I went to school and I had to learn guitar.
Okay.
Or study guitar. I knew how to play guitar before I went to school.
Right.
But that's not where my passion lies.
You just enjoy sound, yeah.
Yeah. And the engineering of it. We do a ton of VO work, whether that's editing or actually directing sessions. So that's cool. But yeah, we just had a project release actually yesterday called Signs of the Sojourner, where we did all the sound. So we did all audio and the music. Steve Pardo was one of my composers on staff, and he absolutely nailed the soundtrack. Very folky, like acid jazz kind of stuff. It's really cool.
And there's a Bandcamp page that people can find.
Yeah, you can find that. It's probably on most of the streaming platforms by now.
And of course,
Spotify and iTunes. But yeah, that's where you can find the music. But the game's cool, little narrative deck building conversation game, which is kind of interesting and
that's
really fitting for a pandemic era. where
Indeed.
we're not communicating much.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was well in development before this all hit, so it's nothing to do
Serendipity.
with pandemic. But yeah, but that's cool. So we had that come out. Another game we're working on, Disintegration, bigger game, is coming out next month, about a month from now actually. But that one's from V1 Interactive as the developer. Big AAA type of thing.
Awesome.
So that was cool to work on. Do some sound design, voice work, and all the cinematic work. So that was us. Yeah.
So you guys are busy.
What do you do most of the time? Yeah. You're not mostly on Risk of Rain, are you?
Oh my God! I think for 3 years now I've been working on Risk of Rain. I've done some side stuff, but they're not out. I'm actually working on a pretty cool project that it's going to be a narrative podcast. So I'm doing the music for that. It's going to be a bunch of episodes, and I'm also gonna do a little bit of sound design, not to the extent that you guys do, but some ambience, some stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
cool.
I'm pretty excited for that because it's also a change of pace from games, and we'll have very different music from all the more upbeat or prog or whatever mayhem goes on onto the. I'm looking forward to doing sessions that have 8 tracks or something, because now it's like I'm opening like a boss track and it's like 100 tracks going on, and it's like, oh my God, how am I gonna mix this? But anyway, yeah, we'll see.
Do you have like a Risk of Rain song template that you just load up that has all like some of your instruments you use?
Yes,
that sort of thing?
it's well, I've started with a kind of default mixing template, and that has all my buses and like stem outputs prepared and all that stuff. But as the tracks move on and stuff, I essentially, when I'm done with a track, I'm control saving as something else in a different folder, removing all the assets and the events. And then this is the template for the remove all the automation and stuff. And because I'll usually add new instruments, have new presets that I make up and stuff like that. One of the great things that Cubase has is that you can import a track from a project. So this has been so great for me to use, because then essentially every track I've ever written is part of my template. I can just I've jumped into Risk of Rain 1 projects to call up all sounds, or I continuously jump from project to project. I'm saying, okay, I used this one back in the song X, and I don't have the sound on the template, but I can just search the thing. You just tell it where the project file is, it reads it, it gives you the list, and you say, okay, I want my drums, my bass, my pad, and import them. You can even import the MIDI events and the audio events into it, and it will, so that's pretty great.
Nice.
Yeah. So Nick, we are, I think, like a couple of months or so away from Risk of Rain 2.1.0.
1.0.
Yeah, which should be very exciting. People are looking forward to it, and we are kind of looking forward to the reaction.
Thanks,
all right,
Chris.
man.
This was awesome.
It was so fun, especially Wise for me was super exciting. I hope people like it, and always fun to chat with you. We don't get the chance to chat so often, but this has been great.
Agreed.
All right, so take care, and we'll talk soon for our insider stuff, all the spoilery things. And everybody, thank you for watching, and bye-bye. All right.
Cool,
awesome.
Man.
Oh man, I'm not looking forward to editing it.